At 58, Lorraine Petrak had $43, a duffel bag, and a single rusted key to a drive-in that everyone in Roanoke had forgotten. The rest of the inventory was just as short: a 1994 Buick with a soft front tire, half a tank of gas, a thermos of station coffee gone cold somewhere past Salem, which she drank anyway because $1.85 was $1.85 now, and waste was a thing for people who still had a house. 30 years of marriage, added up and split down the middle. This was the side of the ledger that came back to her. She took Route 11 out of town with the windows down because the air had quit in April, and there was nobody left who felt like fixing it for her. The road ran flat and tired past the edge of the city, the kind of two-lane the interstate had made pointless decades ago. Off to the east, the Blue Ridge sat blue and patient, the way it always had. Behind her, up on Mill Mountain, the big star would come on at dusk and shine down over a valley that had stopped needing her. She had come out to the starlight to disappear. That was the whole plan, if a person could dignify it with the word. What she did not know, gripping that key until the rust bit her palm, was that in 90 days she would stand in a county courtroom holding one sheet of paper that turned everything she had been told she was worth into a lie. But the paper was 90 days off and locked in the dark, and the gravel between here and there did not care who she used to be. The gate came up on her left the way an old grief does, all at once and right where she had left it. A sagging chain, a padlock orange with rust. Beyond it, the screen tower stood pale against the mountains, 6 stories of peeling white board facing east, the way her father had built it, so the movies always played with the Blue Ridge behind them. The speaker rows ran back from the tower in long, humped lines, and the weeds had taken every one of them, knee-high and going to seed. And out by the road, on the tall reader board her father had been so proud of, a single word still hung in cracked plastic letters. Not Starlight, not the name of any feature that had played here, just Hollis. 6 letters, one of them tilted loose, a word that was not her father's name and was not the drive-ins, a word nobody in Roanoke had ever once been willing to explain to her. Gary had hated that sign. Years back, he had sent a man out with a ladder and a 5-gallon bucket of white, and the man had come down with the job not done, and Gary had never said why. He just stopped mentioning it, the way Gary stopped mentioning anything that did not bend the first time he pushed. Her key fit the padlock. It always had. That lock was the one thing in her life that still recognized her. She drove the Buick through, chained the gate again behind her out of a habit older than her marriage, and parked beside the boarded-up snack bar as the last of the light went orange and then gray. The snack bar windows were sheets of weathered plywood now. Somebody had nailed them up after her father passed, and the nails had wept rust down the wood in long stains. So the whole front of the building looked like it had been crying for 11 years, and nobody had thought to come ask why. She slept in the car that first night. She told herself it was because the booth was locked and she was tired, and not because she was afraid of what it would feel like to be inside any of it. Sometime past 2, a freight train went through the valley, far off, and she lay across the bench seat with her denim jacket over her shoulders and listened to it the way she had listened to it as a girl, when this lot was full of taillights and the screen was the brightest thing for miles. At first light, she got out and did the thing the photograph of her life would have shown if anyone had been there to take it. Silver hair pulled low, the faded denim jacket, the cream blouse with the little flowers gone soft from washing. She hauled the duffel over one shoulder and dragged the old hard-shell suitcase down off the back seat. And when she tried to wheel it across the cattle grate at the gate, the little wheels caught in the ruts and would not roll. So she tilted it up onto its corner and carried it that way, leaning into it, an aging woman walking her whole remaining life in across a gravel lot, under a dead sign that spelled a name she did not understand. That was how Roy Vandermeer found her. She heard the mower before she saw him, a riding mower coming around the back of the snack bar at an idle, and then an old man in a feed cap throttling it down to nothing and just sitting there looking at her like she was a ghost he'd been half expecting. "Lord," he said, "you've got your daddy's way of standing." She did not know him at first. Then the years fell off his face the way they do, and she did. "Mr. Vandermeer." "Roy," he corrected, climbing down stiff from the mower. "You were Lori Reese the last time I called you anything. Yay high. Used to run the popcorn machine without permission." He took off the cap and held it. "I was sorry about your daddy. I was sorry the whole way through it. That was 11 years ago, Roy. I know how long it was." He looked out at the rows he had just cut, the only neat thing on the whole property. "I still mow it, spring through fall. County never asked me to, and your family never paid me to. So don't go reaching for a checkbook you don't have." He said it plain, not for thanks. Man ran the projector 40 years for Walt Reese. You don't quit a man like that just because he's gone. You keep his grass down. It's about the only thing left a fella can do for him. Lorraine set the suitcase flat in the gravel. Her arms were shaking and she let them. "I don't have anything, Roy. I want you to know that before you decide to be kind to me. I've got a car and that bag and $40 and change." 43, she added, because the number had become a thing she could not stop counting. Roy nodded slowly, like that figure settled something rather than alarmed him. "Then you've got exactly what your daddy started with," he said. He'd think that was funny. She asked him about the sign. She pointed at it, the crooked letters catching the morning, and she asked what Hollis meant, why it was up there instead of the drive-in's name, why nobody would ever tell her. And for the first time, the old man's easy face went careful. "That one's not mine to hand you," Roy said. "Your daddy'd want to give you that himself." He turned the cap in his hands. "And he can't, so it'll have to wait for the right day." She let it go. She was too tired to pull on a thread that an 80-year-old man had clearly decided to guard. But she filed it away, the way she had learned in 30 years to file the things people would not say to her face. Roy walked her up toward the tower, talking the whole way, naming things. The concession had a copper line in it, worth something to a scrap man if she ever got desperate, and she would get desperate, he figured. The speaker posts were mostly dead, but the wiring under row 1 might still carry. And the projection booth, the little block building set up high behind the last row so the beam could throw clean over the cars, the booth was the one place he could not take her. "It's bolted," Roy said. He stopped at the foot of the stairs and looked up at the steel door like it might look back. "From the inside. Your daddy bolted that door from the inside the last week he was with us. Drew the bolt, and then, well, then he was gone, and the bolt's been thrown ever since. 11 years, Lori. Nobody's set foot in there. There's no getting at it without you take the wall apart." A cold thread went up the back of her neck that had nothing to do with the morning. Why would he lock himself in? I've asked myself that 100 times mowing this grass. Roy shook his head. "Only thing I know is there's a reel up there. He never once would run. Marked it himself. His own hand, plain as the nose on your face, said right on the can it wasn't to be projected. I asked him what was on it the one time, and he looked at me like I'd asked him to read my mail." The old man shrugged, helpless and gentle. 40 years I threaded every foot of film that played on that screen. That's the only reel I never saw." Lorraine stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at the bolted door, and something in her chest that had gone numb in a lawyer's office 2 weeks ago turned over. Once, faintly, like an engine deciding whether to catch. 2 weeks ago, she had sat at a long table in an office downtown with carpet the color of a bruise, and across from her sat Gary's attorney with a folder, and Gary's chair had stayed empty. Gary himself had not come. Of course he hadn't. You know the kind. The man who calls a thing fair the very second it falls his way, and who sends paper to do the things his own face does not want to be in the room for. "Mr. Petrak will retain the residence," the attorney had said, reading it off the page like a grocery list. "You'll keep your personal effects. 30 years. The house on Grandin she had painted twice and made warm and raised nothing in because the children never came, but warm anyway, hers in every way that did not show up on a deed. Lorraine had asked, in a voice she was ashamed of later for how small it stayed, whether 30 years did not come to more than personal effects. The attorney had not even looked up. Personal effects, Mrs. Petrek. The court would consider that generous. Gary called it a clean break, because men like Gary preferred words that sounded tidy on the way out the door. He had built half the strip malls between here and Boat-Tort County, sign leases and asphalt and corner lots, and he had learned somewhere along the way to look at a person the same way he looked at a parcel. What's it zoned for? What's it worth to me? What will it cost to make it go away? He had run that math on his wife of 30 years and come back with a number, and the number was a duffel bag. She had signed it Lorraine Petrek, the name she took at 26. She had been a Reese before that, Walt Reese's girl from the drive-in out on Route 11, but she had let that girl go a long time ago, the way you let go of a hand you think you will hold again later. Roy was still talking somewhere beside her, but she had stopped hearing him because there was a paper nailed to the snack bar door that she had walked right past in the dark, and now the sun was on it, and even from here she could see it was the kind of paper that comes from a county and not a friend. She crossed the gravel and pulled it loose, Roanoke County letterhead, a seal. Words she had to read twice because her eyes kept sliding off them. Delinquent real estate taxes on the parcel known as the Starlight, 6 acres off Williamson Road, in the amount of $4,211. And below that, in the flat language of men who auction the lives of the dead, notice that the property would be sold at public sale to satisfy the debt in 90 days. $4,000 she did not have. 90 days she could not stop. She stood there in the weeds with the paper going soft in her grip, the dead marquee spelling Hollis behind her, the bolted door watching from the hill. She did not know it yet, but 11 years ago her father had spent his last good week making certain this ground could never be taken from her. Then he had bolted the answer in the dark, with her name on it, and left her to find it. For 3 days she did nothing about the paper but carry it. She folded it small and pushed it into the inside pocket of the denim jacket, down against her ribs, and she felt it there every time she bent to lift a thing, the way you feel a splinter you have decided to live alongside instead of dig out. She had driven out to the Starlight to be finished. A woman does not undo a thing like that in one afternoon just because a county has put a number on her father's ground and given her 90 days to find it. So for 3 days she let the place have her and did not argue, and waited to see what it wanted. What it wanted, mostly, was work. She could not go on sleeping in the Buick. The second night, her hip locked up against the bench seat, and she lay there until the windows went gray, doing the arithmetic of a tired body against a 30-year-old automobile and coming up short on every line. So on the third morning, she found a flat bar in the trunk where her father's road tools had ridden since before she was married, and she pried the plywood off the snack bar's side door. The nails came shrieking out of wood gone soft as cork, 11 years of weather giving them up all at once, and the door swung in on a dark that smelled like her whole childhood. Popcorn oil gone to varnish. Dust. The cold mineral smell of a concrete floor that had not been warm in a decade. She stood in the doorway and let her eyes find the shapes of it. The long service counter where she had stood on a milk crate at 9 years old. The popcorn kettle, its glass clouded, a single unpopped kernel still sitting in the bottom of it like a held breath. The drink cases dark, their doors hanging. On the wall behind the register, a paper calendar, curled and fly-specked, still turned to a month 11 years gone, because the last hand to touch it had been her father's, and nobody after had the heart to flip it forward into a time he was not in. She set her duffel on the counter and she started cleaning, because it was the only prayer she had left that she knew the words to. Roy came around mid-morning with the mower trailer, and when he saw the plywood off the door, he shut the engine down and just sat a moment, the way an old man sits with a thing before he lets it in. Then he climbed down and went to his truck and came back with a folding cot under one arm. "Was my hunting cot?" he said, setting it up in the cleared corner without being asked. "I don't hunt anymore." knees. He fetched a kerosene heater next, and 2 jugs of water, and a coffee can of mismatched tools, and a sleeve of paper cups gone a little yellow. He laid it all out on the counter like a man unpacking groceries in a house he had keys to. "Now don't," he said, before she could open her mouth about money. "I told you about the checkbook you don't have. This is just things sitting in my shed feeling sorry for themselves. You'd be doing them a kindness." Roy. I knew the man 40 years, Lori. He straightened up slow, a hand at the small of his back. "You're going to have to let some of us be loyal to him out loud. We've been doing it quiet a long time. It's wearing on us." She had to turn and wipe the counter again so he would not see her face. They worked the rest of that day, the 2 of them, in the easy not talking of people who had a dead man in common. She swept 11 years of dust into the daylight, and he carried out the ruined cardboard and the rat-fouled boxes. And along about the afternoon, she found her father's apron hung on a nail behind the storeroom door, the brown one with the starlight stitched across the bib in thread, gone the color of weak tea. His tally was still in the front pocket on a clipboard. A column of figures in that blunt pencil hand she would have known in the dark, popcorn and cola and the little chocolate things the children always begged for, added down the side in his careful arithmetic, the last show he ever counted. She held it a long while. Then she hung the apron back on its nail because some things you do not put on, you just keep where the man left them, so the building can go on believing he is only out at the gate and coming back. That night she slept inside for the first time, on Roy's cot, with the kerosene heater ticking orange in the dark and the screen tower standing pale outside the little window, 6 stories of her father's stubbornness facing the mountains. And lying there, she let herself think the thought she had been keeping at arm's length since the courthouse, that she was not, in fact, done, that a body that will get up and pry a door and sweep a floor is a body that has not yet decided to quit, whatever the mouth above it has been telling people. $4,000 stood between her and the only ground that had ever been hers. She did not have it, but she was not done, and that turned out to be a different thing. The copper was Roy's idea, said out loud the way he said most of his hard things, sideways and gentle. He had mentioned it the first morning. He mentioned it again at the end of the week, standing in the snack bar looking up at the runs of bright pipe that fed the old soda fountain. "Scrap man down Williamson Road will weigh that and pay you cash," he said. "It's good copper. Your daddy never bought the cheap line for anything." He rubbed his jaw. "I'd not say it if you weren't up against a clock. It's like selling a man's teeth. But teeth won't buy you the 90 days, and that copper might buy you a piece of them." So she pulled copper. It was the hardest 2 days of work her hands had done in 30 soft years on Grandin Road. She learned the wrench off Roy, and she learned where the lines ran, and she cut, and she pulled, and she coiled the bright pipe into the trunk of the Buick until the back end of the car sat low on its springs. It felt exactly like what it was, which was a woman selling the bones of a place to keep the place from being sold out from under her. And somewhere in the middle of the second day, sweating through the cream blouse with the little flowers, she started to laugh at the bitter joke of it and could not entirely stop. And Roy looked over and decided wisely to let her have it. The scrapyard sat behind a chain-link fence down Williamson Road, between a tire shop and a stretch of nothing, with a leaning sign and a dog that did not bother to get up. The man at the scale was younger than her and bored, and he weighed her father's copper without one word about where copper like that comes from, which she was grateful for. He counted bills off a roll into her open palm. $96. She stood holding it in the white gravel lot with the trucks going by out on the road. $96 against $4,211, and she made herself feel the whole distance of that, every foot of it. And then she folded the money in with the 43 she had left, and she drove back out to the starlight, because the distance being long is not the same as the distance being walked. She put the copper money in a coffee can on the counter. It was not nearly enough. It was the first thing in 2 weeks that was hers, and that she had earned with her 2 hands, and that turned out to count for more than the dollars said. Then they lit a row. It was Roy who wanted it, more than her. He'd been brooding on the speaker posts all week, the long humped rows of them running back from the tower under their crowns of weed, and the wiring under row 1 that he kept saying might still carry if a person were stubborn about it. So on a cool evening near the end of that first week, the 2 of them went out into the lot with the coffee can of tools and a trouble light, and they got down in the wet grass at the head of row 1 and went after it, her knees in the dirt, the smell of crushed weeds and old creosote. Roy's hands spotted and sure, stripping a wire back to its copper while he talked low about her father, the way the man had wired half of this himself rather than pay the union boys out of Roanoke, how he would climb that tower at 60 to change a bulb because he did not trust anybody else to be careful of his screen. "There," Roy said. "That's bright. Go throw the knife switch on the post by the booth, the low one. Not the high one, the low one. Then come running." She went up the dark slope to the foot of the booth, to the bolted steel door she still could not look at straight, and she found the gray knife switch on its weathered post, and she put her hand on the handle and pulled it down. It bit closed with a sound like a trap. Behind her, out in the dark of the lot, a single speaker came on. It was nothing. It was a soft electric hiss out of one cast metal box on a post in row 1, the empty live sound of a circuit that has something to say and is only waiting on a picture to say it. It was the smallest possible thing. Lorraine stood on the slope in the dark with her hand still on the switch, and she listened to that one speaker hum across the weeds, the first sound that lot had made in 11 years. And something came up through her so hard and so fast that she had to sit right down in the wet grass and put her face in her hands. Roy let her. He stayed down at row 1 in the trouble light, an old man being very busy with a wire that did not need him, giving her the dark to do it in. When she could, she looked up. The screen tower stood over her, white going to violet in the last of the light, and behind it the Blue Ridge sat the way it always had, patient as a thing that has seen every family in this valley think it was the first one to be broken. Up on Mill Mountain, miles off, the big star came on for the night, red and white over Roanoke, and right there beside her, 3 feet from her shoulder, the bolted booth door sat shut on whatever her father had carried up those stairs the last week of his life and drawn the bolt against. You have most likely begun to guess what was waiting on the other side of that door. Hold the guess gently. You are already closer to it than Lorraine let herself get that night, and you are still a good deal further than you think. She slept hard after that, the way you sleep when the body has finally been spent on something worth spending it on. And she woke before light to the sound she would come to dread, though she did not know to dread it yet. An engine out on the access road. Not Roy's mower, not Roy's old truck. Something newer than anything that had any reason to be out on that forgotten stretch off Route 11 at dawn. She went to the snack bar window with the coffee in her hands, and she looked down the long gravel toward the gate. A pickup sat outside the chained fence with its motor running, clean and white and new, the kind of truck a man buys to be seen arriving in rather than to haul anything. It idled there in the gray light, patient, nosed up to the gate she had chained behind her that first night out of a habit older than her marriage. And she did not need to see the door of it open. She did not need him to step down into the weeds in his good boots and stand there looking up at the property with his hands on his hips, the way he looked at every parcel he had ever decided he wanted. She knew the set of those shoulders from across a valley. She had been married to them for 30 years. Gary had found the drive-in. She did not go down to him right away. She stood at the snack bar window with the coffee going cold against her palms, and she watched the white truck idle at the chained gate. And she let it idle, because making Gary Petrak wait was the one small thing left in the whole world that she could still reach out and do. He had taken the house on Grandin Road. He had taken the 30 years. He had taken the good china that came down through her own people, and the bed they bought the first married spring, and the very idea she had carried of how her life was going to end. And he had left her the keys and a duffel bag and a lawyer who did not bother to show his face. But he could not make her hurry down a gravel hill. So she finished the coffee, cold and bitter the way her father used to drink it, and she set the cup beside the can with its $96 and its 43. And only then did she walk out into the wet, bright morning to find out what he wanted, though she already knew. A man like Gary did not drive a new truck out to a forgotten drive-in at dawn to ask after a woman's health. The gravel was loud under her shoes. Down at the gate, he had shut the engine off and stepped out into the weeds and the good boots, the tooled ones he wore to closings, and he was standing with his hands on his hips, looking up the slope at the screen tower and the snack bar and the long, humped rows of speaker posts, wearing the expression she knew better than she knew her own face in a mirror. It was the look he got when he had already started drawing lines on a thing, curb cuts and parking counts and where the new sign would stand. She had watched him lay that look over 100 cornfields and creek bottoms in 30 years. The look of a man doing arithmetic on ground that belonged to somebody else, and she had been fool enough for most of those years to think it handsome. "There she is," he said, when she came down to her side of the chain link. He gave her the closing smile, the warm one, the one that had moved a great deal of other people's land. "Lord Laurie, look at you." She did not give the nickname back. She let the fence stand between them where it was. "I heard you were out here." He shook his head, slow, sorrowful, a man grieved by the foolishness of women. "Marge Dillard saw your daddy's old Buick turning off 11 and like to fell out of her car. I told her, that cannot be Lorraine. She has got more sense than to be living rough out at that ruin. And here you are." He hooked 2 fingers in the chain link, easy, neighborly. "Camping in a snack bar haunt her at your age, with your back the way it is." "My back's fine," she said. "I've been working it." Something moved behind his eyes at that and was gone. He had expected her smaller. He had built whatever he came to say around a Lorraine who was already beaten. And the woman on the far side of the fence had copper dust in the creases of her hands and dirt under her nails, and had said, "My back's fine, the way you close a door." "Well," he said, because Gary always recovered, it was the truest thing about him. "I am glad you are keeping busy. I am. But I have got to be straight with you, Laurie, because somebody ought to, and the good Lord knows your daddy never would." He lifted his chin toward the hill. "This ground here. You know they rezoned the whole Route 11 corridor commercial back in the spring. The entire frontage, clear to the county line. You are sitting on 6 acres of buildable dirt off Williamson Road, and you do not even know what is under you. People would stand in line for this. The right people. You being the right people," she said. He put a hand flat to his chest, wounded. "I am trying to help you." "I remember your helping," she said. "I have got a duffel bag full of it." He let that one go by. He was building towards something, and he did not want her temper in the road of it. He came on gentler now, the voice he used to use in the dark when he wanted a thing and knew the daylight version of himself had been hard to love that day. "I heard about the county notice," he said. "The back taxes, $4,200 and change, posted for sale, 90 days. He let her hear how much he knew. Let it sit in the morning between them. "Laurie, you do not have $4,200. I know to the dollar what you do not have, because I am the man the court says does not have to give it to you." He had the grace to look at his boots when he said it. That came out wrong. It came out honest, she said. That is a different thing from wrong, in you. And then he laid the offer down, the real reason for the boots in the early drive, dressed the way he dressed everything, as a kindness he was doing her out of the goodness of a heart she had 30 years of evidence against. He would pay the county. He would make the back taxes vanish that very morning, one phone call gone. And he would write her a check on top of it, a real check, walking money, more than the place was worth to anybody on earth who was not him. And all she had to do was sign the deed across to him and be free of the whole sorry business, free of the taxes, free of the weeds, free of the spectacle of an old woman trying to raise the dead off Williamson Road. He used the word free 4 separate times. She counted them the way her father counted cola and popcorn down the side of a clipboard. She did not argue with him. That was the thing he was not ready for, and it was the thing Roy had been teaching her without either of them having a name for it. She did not raise her voice, and she did not cry, and she did not sign. She stood on her side of the fence with her hands quiet at her sides, and she let him talk himself all the way to the end of it. And when he was done, she said only that she would think on it, which was not a yes, and he knew enough about her after 30 years to hear that it was not a yes, and it rattled him more than shouting would have. Then he looked up past her shoulder, up the hill to the marquee where the letters her father never took down still spelled the one word against the morning sky, Hollis. And a small irritation crossed his face, the tidy man's irritation at an untidy thing. "First thing I would do is get that name down off the sign," he said, half to himself. "Hollis. Nobody knows what it means. Nobody ever did. It is bad for resale. A name on a thing that does not mean anything to anybody." He looked back at her and he misread, the way he had been misreading her since Carter was governor, the stillness that had come over her face. "I would put something clean up there. Something that tells a man what the place is." "It tells me what it is," she said. He did not understand that, and he did not try to. He wedged his card into the chain link when it was plain she would not take it from his hand. A heavy cream card with his name raised on it in letters you could feel with your thumb. He told her to be smart. He told her the offer had a life on it, that he could not hold it past the auction, that once the county sold the place out from under her, he would simply buy it at the courthouse steps for the price of the taxes, and she would walk away with nothing in her hand instead of something. And did she not want to walk away with something? After everything? Then he climbed back into the white truck and backed it careful around in the weeds, mindful of his paint, and he drove off down Route 11 toward town, and the dust of him hung in the still air a long while after the sound of him had thinned out and gone. Lorraine drew the card out of the fence. She did not throw it in the weeds, because littering was beneath her even now, even here. She slid it into the jacket pocket opposite the one that held the county notice. One man's telephone number against another man's seal. And she stood at the gate in the settling quiet and breathed. Roy's truck came up the access road maybe 20 minutes after, and she knew from the slow, careful way he climbed down, not looking at her straight, that he had met the white truck out on 11 and known whose it was without being told. He came up to the gate and considered the dust still hanging over the road, and he worked his jaw. That was him, Roy said. It was not a question. That was him. Roy was quiet a spell. Then he said the thing that turned the whole morning and the whole 90 days and everything that came after, though neither of them yet knew how far it would turn. He said it with his eyes up on the marquee and not on her, the way he always set down the heavy things. He wants you to sign it over. He wants to pay the taxes and hand me a little check and have it. To put something up on. He says I will walk away with something instead of nothing. Roy nodded slow. Lorraine, I am going to tell you a thing about your daddy and this ground that I have kept to myself a long time. On account of it was not mine to tell. While there was no reason, there is a reason now. He turned and looked at her. That word up on that sign, the one that man wants gone first thing because he says it does not mean anything. It is the truest word on the whole place. Hollis. That was your mother's name before it was anybody's, her own people's name, back before she married your daddy and before there was you. He swallowed. When your daddy bought these 6 acres, a young fellow with more nerve than money, he did not put the deed in his own name the way every other man in this valley would have done without a second thought. He raised the tower and strung the speakers with his own 2 hands, and he put your mother's name up on that marquee, where the whole of Roanoke going by on 11 could read it. And I have always understood the quiet way you come to understand a man you have stood beside 40 years, that the name on the sign and the name on the paper down at the courthouse were the same name. It was the most a man who could not say a soft thing out loud ever found a way to say. She did not speak. The meadowlark was going at it somewhere out in the rows. "Your daddy never owned this place with anybody," Roy said. "Not a partner, not a bank, not one living soul. He would have cut off his hand before he tied this dirt to another man's name. So whatever paper there is, and there is paper, Lorraine, your daddy was too careful a man for there not to be. Gary Petrak is not on it. He never could have been. That marriage of yours came along years after this ground was already spoken for." He looked at her steady. "Do you hear what I am telling you? That man at the gate is trying to buy you something you may already own. I just cannot tell you where your daddy put the proof of it. Your daddy was the only one who ever knew that." And the two of them, without either one saying so, turned and looked up the hill at the projection booth, at the bolted steel door at the head of the iron stair that she had not once been able to look at straight since the first night in the dark. The door her father had drawn shut from the inside the last good week of his life, and bolted against the whole world, and gone back down the stairs, and never climbed again. "He sealed that booth himself," Roy said low, "that last week when he knew which way it was going. Would not let me up, would not let anybody. I thought it was just a dying man's strangeness, wanting his picture house to himself there at the end. I would carry his coffee up and set it on the step and go, and he would take it in after I was gone." Roy's voice went rough, and he let it. He carried things up those stairs, those last days, slow, one at a time, his box and his cans, and I do not know what all, up steps that were already more than his heart had left in it. And then he threw the bolt. From the inside, Lorraine. A man only bolts a door from the inside when he means for the right person to be the one who opens it, and not a day before she is ready. You believe you already know what is waiting behind that door, and it is fair that you should. You have been patient. Hold the picture lightly a while longer. What is in there is a smaller thing than you are imagining, and it is going to be worth a great deal more than the 6 acres it has been sitting over all these years. Lorraine looked at the booth a long time. The morning had warmed, and the blue ridge had come up blue and final behind the white tower, and far off on Mill Mountain the big star stood washed out and patient in the daylight. And down on Route 11, the last of Gary's dust had finally let go of the air and settled. And she understood, standing there at the foot of her father's drive-in, that the place had not been keeping her these 2 weeks the way she had let herself believe. It had been waiting for her to be ready to climb the stairs. She wiped her hands down the front of her jeans. "Roy," she said, "I am going to need that flat bar out of the trunk." Roy fetched it from the trunk, the flat bar with the paint worn off the middle where 40 years of hands had gripped it, and he made to come up behind her, and she stopped him with a look that had no unkindness in it. This part she would do on her own feet. He knew that look. He had stood beside her father too many years not to know it, and he settled back at the foot of the stair with his cap in his 2 hands, like a man waiting at the rear of a church. The iron stair ran up the flank of the snack bar to the booth, slick yet with the night, and it rang under her shoes like a thing half awake. She climbed slow. Her back spoke up at the 7th tread, and she let it have its say, and kept on. Below her, Roy went small and the valley went wide, Route 11 running off pale and flat toward town, the Blue Ridge standing behind it, the soft blue of something seen through wood smoke. And the higher she rose, the more the morning handed her, until she was level at last with the back of the great screen, and the whole 6 acres lay spread beneath her in the wet light. The door was steel and gray as a held breath. The bolt was thrown. The hasp had rusted to the deep red of a penny left out in the weather, and some hand, years gone, had run a chain through it and snapped on a lock she had no key to and never would. She did not need the key. She had the bar. She set the lip of it into the seam beside the hasp and leaned and put the whole of herself onto it. and the old metal groaned and held. She backed it out and bit it in deeper and worked it the way Roy had taught her to work the copper loose down below, short and patient, not fighting the steel but asking it. And on the fourth ask, the screws tore up out of the dry wood with a sound like a long breath let go. The chain swung loose and knocked against the door. The door gave inward an inch into the dark. Cold came out to meet her. Cold. And the smell of a room sealed against 30 turning seasons, oiled steel and old film and dust, gone soft as flannel, and under all of it, faint as a thought, the bitter ghost of coffee somebody had carried up a stair a long time ago. She laid her hand flat to the door and pushed, and it swung back, and the morning reached in past her shoulder and threw a long, pale stripe across the floor of the place her father had closed up the last week he was able to climb to it. It was all of it still there. The machine stood square on its iron legs in the center of the floor. The projector, its big round arms still spooled, a reel still laced through the gate, as though he had only stepped down a minute and meant to come back and run the rest of the show. His stool, his clipboard hung on its nail with the last night's count, ciphered down the margin in the small, close hand she would have known in pitch dark. A row of cans on the shelf, a cup on the sill gone dry these many years, a brown ring dried in the bottom of it. She stood in the doorway and touched none of it a while because a sealed room is a held breath of its own, and she was in no hurry now to let it go. Then she went looking because Roy had said there would be paper, and her father had been too careful a man for there not to be. She found it the way you find a thing left on purpose for you, with the hands before the eyes. Along the back wall, under the little square port the light threw out through, a steel panel was screwed flat to the studs, gray as everything else, easy to slide a look clean past. But her fingers, reading the wall in the dimness, caught on a seam where no seam ought to be, and a thin, cool draft came off it, and when she set her nails to the lip, the panel shifted. The screws were wing-headed. He had meant them to back out by hand. He had meant her hand. She turned them out one at a time and stood them in a row on the bench the way he would have, and she lifted the panel away and set back in the dark. Between the studs was a gray strongbox with its handle worn bright. She carried it into the stripe of light, set it on the bench, and thumbed the catch, and it was not even locked. He had done all his locking on the outside of things, on the door and the booth and the bolt, so that the last small lid, the one over the heart of it, would lift easy for whoever came that far. On the top, folded once, lay an envelope. The paper had yellowed to the color of cream left standing, and across its face, in pencil, in the blunt, soft lead he used to shave to a point with his pocket knife and bear down on till it near cut, were 3 words: "For my Lorraine." She sat down on his stool because her legs asked it of her. She had not laid eyes on her own name in his hand in a great many years. There it stood, the L he always drew too large, the loop of it, the whole word running downhill as if it weighed more at the finish than the start. She set one finger to it. Light, the way you lay a hand on a sleeping child so as not to wake it. And she stayed that way, a spell with the cold of the booth all around her, and a mourning dove going somewhere off down in the speaker rows. And whatever she set down inside herself sitting there, she set it down quiet, and it was nobody's business but hers and the room's. Then she opened it. Inside lay a single paper, folded in thirds, soft at the creases. She did not take in all of its words at one go. There were the words a court uses, stamped across the head of it, quitclaim, and beneath them a stretch of land laid out in the dry tongue of surveyors. So many rods and poles off such an iron pin. The 6 acres set down in the only language that ground will answer to. And there was a date, struck into the corner by the clerk of the Circuit Court of Roanoke County with a steel die that bit the paper, a day in the spring of 1987. And there, in the body of it, typed plain on a courthouse machine, was the name of the one to whom her father had signed over the whole of it. Free and clear, that far-off spring, the 6 acres and the tower and the word up on the sign. It was her own name, her whole name, the one she was born under, the one she carried before she was ever any man's wife, before the word Petrak was ever fixed to the front of it, years before. 9 full years before she stood up in a church and gave a man named Gary the use of her name and her grandmother's china and 30 years of her one and only life. He had put the ground in her hands when she was a girl of 19 and never breathed a word of it. He had let her grow and go off and marry and never once told her, "You have got land, you have got a place that is yours alone, and no man living can sign it out from under you," because to tell it would have meant speaking aloud the kind of thing his nature had never let him speak. And so he set it down the only way that was left to him, in a courthouse, on a county machine, with a clerk to witness, and walled it up behind a panel against the day she would need to be told, and folded in behind the deed, wrapped once in a square of chamois, was a film canister, a small one, a single short reel, and across its lid in grease pencil, in that same bearing down hand, it read, "Do not project," and beneath that, a dash, and after the dash, a single letter, L. She held it in her lap atop the deed and did not thread it. Not yet. She knew, the way you know a thing is yours to open in its own hour, that the little reel belonged to the end of something, and she was not at the end. She had a man to meet across a table first. The hearing fell on a Tuesday at the old county courthouse, the auction stay hearing, the last word on whether her father's 6 acres would be cried off to the highest hand on the courthouse steps for the price of $4,200 in back taxes. She wore the cream blouse with the small flowers on it and the denim jacket gone soft as a worn glove, and she drew her silver hair back low and plain, and she carried the deed flat against her in a stiff manila folder, like a thing that might take wing. Gary was there ahead of her, and here was the quiet joke of it, the one she did not let reach her face. The lawyer, who could not trouble himself to show up the day they cut 30 years of her down to a duffel bag and a ring of keys, that man had stayed home. But there was a lawyer at Gary's elbow now, a sharp young one in a good suit with a leather folder of his own, because now there was buildable dirt in the matter, 6 commercial acres off Williamson Road in the matter, and money will buy a man a face at a table where plain decency never could. She was not asked to say much, and she said less than she was asked. The county's man laid out the taxes owed and the notice posted and the 90 days near run out. Gary's young lawyer rose and spoke smooth about the Route 11 corridor and the rezoning and his client standing as a party with an interest, a marital interest he called it, in property that had lain in the family the whole length of the marriage and ought by rights to be brought to sale, and the money split as the divorce had found no occasion to split it. When it came, her turn, the judge, an old woman with her reading glasses run down her nose, asked did she care to answer. Lorraine stood. She made no speech. She had watched a man make speeches for 30 years, and there was nothing in his kind she wanted to borrow. She opened the manila folder and drew out the deed her father had hidden, and she stepped to the table, and she laid it down, and she slid it across the wood with 2 fingers, and she sat back down. The young lawyer reached it first. He read it the way a man reads a thing he has already begun spending in his head, quick and sure. And then he read it a second time slower, and she watched the sureness drain out of his face the way water drains out of sand. He leaned and said something low against Gary's ear. Gary took up the paper, and Gary, who could read a deed faster than any honest man in the valley, found the date in the corner. 1987, recorded, stamped by the clerk. Her name, her girl name, standing alone on the line. She watched him run the cold, quick figuring he had run his whole life long on the worth of a piece of ground, except that this, once the ground was sliding the wrong way beneath his boots, and there was nothing at the foot of the column but the plain truth. He had taken the house. He had taken the bed and the china and the better years. But the one thing he had driven out at first light to gather up, the one thing he had stood at the fence and called worthless out loud so as to come by it cheap, had never once in all their marriage been his to take. For a man cannot divide what was never the marriage's to begin with. It had been hers since she was 19. He had been wed 30 years to a woman who owned 6 acres outright and did not know it. And now she knew it, and now a court knew it. And the look on him as that came home was the only payment she ever drew from the man. And it was plenty. The judge held the deed up into the light from the tall window and read the clerk's stamp aloud. She sent her own clerk down into the vault where the county keeps its old books, the great leather deed books with the marbled edges, and they carried up the book of deeds for that year. And there it was, set down in the proper hand on the proper page in the spring of 1987, witnessed and stamped and filed and waiting all this time like a coal banked under ash. The clerk read the recording into the record in a flat county voice, the book and the page and the day, and with every figure she read off, Gary Petrak's interest in that land grew smaller, and his young lawyer's option to buy grew thinner, until there was nothing left of the one or the other. The Circuit Court of Roanoke County entered its judgment that same afternoon. Not a favor, a judgment. The title was quieted in Lorraine's name, and the cloud struck off of it, and the auction voided, not as a mercy shown a poor woman, but as the one plain outcome the law allowed once the truth of the paper lay on the table. The developer's option died on the page it was written on, and the clerk filed a fresh certified copy of the 87 deed at the very front of the property's record, to stand first from then on, so that the next man to come climbing the chain of title with a folder and a smooth young lawyer would strike her father's blunt pencil truth before he ever got near the dirt, and would learn, before he spent $1 of anybody's money, that this ground already had a name on it, and the name had been settled long ago. The back taxes she paid herself, in the end, over the counter at the treasurer's office, a little at a time as the snack bar gave up the last of its copper and the first paying carloads rolled back in through the gate. It was hers to carry now, the taxes and the weeds and the long, slow mow of it all, and a weight does not bear down the same way once the weight is finally your own. She had the marquee seen to first, before the snack bar, before the screen even, because it cost the least and meant the most. A sign man out of Salem came with his little pots of enamel and his long-handled brushes, and she had him take nothing down and change nothing, only go over what already stood and bring it back up bright. And when he was finished, the one word stood against the Blue Ridge fresh and black, and sure as the night her father first raised it for the woman whose name it was. Hollis. The very thing a man in a white truck had wanted gone before all else, burning now where you could read it clean off Route 11 in the coming dark. The first show back fell on a Friday at the front of summer, and she set no price on the gate. Roy painted the board himself and wired it to the chain link, white letters on barn red. The last show's always free. By the time the light went blue behind Mill Mountain, the lot was near to half full. Pickups backed in nose out with their tailgates dropped and lawn chairs standing up in the beds. Children running the rows where the speaker posts still stood like a little iron orchard. Somebody's dog working the ground for 40 years of spilled popcorn. The big star up on Mill Mountain came on at full dark and burned its red and white and blue down over the whole valley. And her father's tower took the light and threw a story up into the night. And the people watched it from their truck beds, the way people used to, the crickets sawing away beneath it, and the cool sliding down off the mountains. You have likely already guessed what her father aimed his camera at, the one time in his whole life he ever lifted one. You are most of the way there. You are not all the way. When the feature had run out and the families folded their chairs and rolled slow over the cattle grate with their headlights swinging and their young ones gone to sleep in the back, and the lot had thinned to a few who lingered, and a pair parked far at the rear who were not watching the screen at all, Lorraine climbed the iron stair one more time, alone, into a dark she knew now by heart. She took down the little reel marked for her and for no one else, and she laced it through the machine the way Roy had been teaching her these weeks, frame and gate and sprocket, and she drew the switch. The lamp came up white, and a beam of dust-struck light reached out across the empty lot and broke against the great pale tower, and on it, 60 feet tall over the blue ridge, a thing woke that had lain dark in a can for 40 years and more. A little girl in a sundress on the hood of a Buick, a drive-in new and white and crowded with cars in a summer long since carried off. And beside the child, a young woman with her head thrown back, laughing at the man behind the camera. A woman wearing the child's own face, with a name standing up on the marquee over the both of them. Fresh painted then, as it was fresh painted now. The film had no sound to it. It had no need of any. Her father had stood about where the machine stood now and pointed his one camera, not at the picture, and not at the crowd, and not even at the mountains he loved best, but at the two of them, his wife and his girl, lit gold in the last of the light of a day in a year, when nobody yet knew the first thing about how it all came out. The child up on the tower turned and looked straight out, straight up the beam and across all the years, and lifted one small hand and waved, and then the reel ran out, the way her father's reels had always had a way of running out before the thing was done, the tail of it ticking through the gate, the picture gone over all at once to white. He never did reach the end of that one. He had not been given the time for it. She did not splice it or run it back or reach to bring the lamp down. Her hand lay on the warm iron of the machine her father had run 10,000 nights, and she let the bare white light pour out over the lot and the folded tailgates and the dark, soft shoulders of the mountains, and she let it burn. On the tower, a little girl had waved once, and the film was spent. She stood in the booth, its one window lit from inside.